Hello, everyone, and welcome back to part 8 of our read aloud of Roald Dahl's The Witches. Oh man, what a spot we left off in part 7, huh? The narrator had made it through the witches' meeting. They were about to leave. He was almost safe. And then one of them smelled dog's droppings. The others started sniffing about and realized they also noticed the smell. Knowing that a child was in the room, the Grand High Witch ordered them to search and find out where this kid was. And when we left off, they had found him. They had grabbed him. They've covered his mouth so he can't even scream for help anymore. And they're taking him up to the Grand High Witch. Now, as dramatic as a moment that was to leave off, it honestly shouldn't have been much of a surprise. Because the narrator from the very beginning of the story, if you go all the way back to part 1, told us he had 2 encounters with a witch, or witches, before he was 8 years old. From the first, he escaped unharmed. That was the witch at the bottom of the tree when he was building the tree house earlier in the story. So we knew now that he had had his second encounter being in there with those witches during the meeting, you knew something was coming. Well, we're about to find out what. I was carried onto the platform with many arms and with my arms and legs held tight by many hands, and I lay there suspended in the air facing the ceiling. I saw the Grand Eye Witch standing over me, grinning at me in the most horrible way. She held up the small blue bottle of mouse maker as she said, "Now, for a little medicine, hold his nose to make him open his mouth." Strong fingers pinched my nose. I kept my mouth closed tight and held my breath, but I couldn't do it for long. My chest felt like it was bursting. I opened my mouth to get one big, quick breath of air, and as I did so, the Grand High Witch poured the entire contents of the little bottle down my throat. Oh, the pain and the fire! It felt as though a kettle full of boiling water had been poured into my mouth. My throat was going up in flames. Then very quickly, the frightful, burning, searing, scorching feeling started spreading down into my chest and into my tummy and on into my arms and legs and all over my body. I screamed and screamed, but once again the gloved hand was clapped over my lips. The next thing I felt was my skin beginning to tighten. How else can I describe it? It was quite literally a tightening and shrinking of the skin all over my body, from the top of my head to the tips of my fingers to the ends of my toes. I felt as though I was a balloon, and somebody was twisting the top of the balloon, twisting, and the balloon was getting smaller and smaller, and the skin was getting tighter, and soon I was going to burst. Then the squeezing began. This time felt like I was inside a suit of iron, and somebody was turning a screw. And with each turn of the screw, the iron suit became smaller and smaller, so that I was squeezed like an orange into a pulpy mess with the juice running out of my sides. After that, there came a fierce prickling sensation all over my skin, or what was left of my skin, as though tiny needles were forcing their way out through the surface of the skin from the inside. This, I realized now, was the growing of the mouse fur. Far away in the distance, I heard the voice of the Grand High Witch yelling, 500 doses. The stinking little carbuncle has had 500 doses, and the alarm clock has been smashed. Now we are having instantaneous action. I heard clapping and cheering, and I remember thinking, I'm not myself any longer. I've gone clear out of my own skin. I noticed the floor was only an inch from my nose. I noticed also a pair of little furry front paws resting on the floor. I was able to move those paws. They were mine. At that moment, I realized that I was not a little boy any longer. I was a mouse. Now for the mouse trap, I heard the Grand High Witch yelling. I've got it right here. And here's a piece of cheese. But I wasn't going to wait around for that. I was off across the platform like a streak of lightning. I was astonished at my own speed. I leapt over Witch's feet right and left. And in no time at all, I was down the steps and onto the floor of the ballroom itself, skittering off among the rows of chairs. What I especially liked was the fact that I made no sound at all as I ran. I was a swift and silent mover. And quite amazingly, the pain had all gone now. I was feeling quite remarkably well. It's not a bad thing after all, I thought to myself, to be tiny as well as speedy when there's a bunch of dangerous females after your blood. I selected the back leg of a chair and squeezed up against it and kept very still. In the distance, the Grand High Witch was shouting, leave the little stinkpot alone. It's not worth bothering about. He's only a mouse now. Somebody else will soon catch it. Let us get out of here. The meeting is over. Unlock the doors. Shove off to the Sunshine Terrace to have tea with that idiotic manager. I peeped round the leg of the chair and watched the hundreds of witches' feet walking out through the doors of the ballroom. When they had all gone, and the place was absolutely silent, I began to move cautiously about on the floor. Suddenly I remembered Bruno. He must surely be around here somewhere too. "Bruno!" I called out. I wasn't seriously expecting that I would be able to speak at all now that I had become a mouse, so I got the shock of my life when I heard my own voice, my own perfectly normal, rather loud voice coming out of my tiny mouth. It was wonderful, though. I was thrilled. I tried it again. "Bruno Jenkins, where are you? If you can hear me, give a shout." My voice was exactly the same, and just as loud as it had been when I was a boy. "Hey there, Bruno Jenkins, where are you?" But there was no answer. I pottered about between the seat legs, trying to get used to being so close to the ground. I decided I rather liked it. You might be wondering why I wasn't depressed at all, but I found myself thinking, what's so wonderful about being a little boy anyway? Why is that necessarily any better than being a mouse? I know that mice get hunted and they sometimes get poisoned or caught in traps, but little boys sometimes get killed too. Little boys could be run over by motor cars, or they could die of some awful illness. Little boys have to go to school. Mice don't. Mice don't have to pass exams. Mice don't have to worry about money. Mice, as far as I can see, only have two enemies, humans and cats. My grandmother's a human, but I know for certain she'll always love me whoever I am, or whatever I look like. And she never, thank goodness, keeps a cat. When mice grow up, they don't ever have to go to war and fight against other mice. Mice, I felt pretty certain all like each other. People don't. Yes, I told myself. I don't think it's at all a bad thing to be a mouse. I was wandering around the ballroom floor thinking about all this when I spotted another mouse. It was crouching on the floor, holding a piece of bread in its front paws and nibbling away at it with great gusto. It had to be Bruno. "Hi, Bruno," I said. He glanced up at me for about 2 seconds, then went right on guzzling. "What'd you find?" "One of them dropped it. Fish paste sandwich. It's pretty good." He too spoke with a perfectly normal voice. One would have expected that a mouse, if it was going to talk at all, would do so with only the smallest, squeakiest voice you could imagine. It was terrifically funny to hear the voice of the rather loud-mouthed Bruno coming out of that tiny mouse's throat. "Listen, Bruno, now that we're both mice, I think we ought to start thinking a bit about the future." He stopped eating and stared at me with small black eyes. "What do you mean, we? The fact that you're a mouse has nothing to do with me." "But you're a mouse too, Bruno." "Don't be a fool. I'm not a mouse." "I'm afraid you are, Bruno." "I most certainly am not. Why are you insulting me? I haven't been rude to you. Why do you call me a mouse?" "Don't you know what happened to you?" "What on earth are you talking about?" "Well, I have to inform you that not very long ago the witches turned you into a mouse, then they did it to me." "You're lying. I'm not a mouse." "If you hadn't been so busy guzzling that sandwich, you would have noticed your hairy paws, Bruno. Take a look at them." Bruno looked down at his paws and he jumped. "Good grief, I am a mouse. Well, you just wait till my father hears about this." "You may think it's an improvement." "Well, I don't want to be a mouse. I refuse to be a mouse," Bruno shouted, jumping up and down. "I'm Bruno Jenkins." "Well, there are worse things than being a mouse. You can live in a hole." "I don't want to live in a hole." "You can creep into the kitchen at night and nibble through all the packets of raisins and cornflakes and chocolate cookies and everything else you can find. You can stay there all night eating yourself silly. I mean, that's what mice do." "Well, now that's a thought," Bruno said, perking up a bit. "But how am I going to open the door of the fridge to get at the cold chicken and all the leftovers? That's something I do every evening at home." "Maybe your rich father will get you a special little mouse fridge all to yourself. I don't know, one that you can open." "You say a witch did this to me?" "Which witch?" "The one who gave you the chocolate bar in the hotel lobby yesterday. Do you remember?" "That filthy old cow! I'll get her for this. Where is she? Who is she?" "Forget it. You don't have a hope, Bruno. Your biggest problem at the moment is your parents. How are they going to take this? Are they going to treat you with sympathy and kindness?" Bruno considered this for a moment. "I think my father's going to be a bit put out." "And your mother?" "Well, she's terrified of mice." "Then you've got a problem, haven't you?" "Why only me? What about you?" Well, my grandmother will understand perfectly. She knows all about witches. Bruno took another bite of his sandwich. Well, what do you suggest then? I suggest we both go first of all and consult my grandmother. She'll know exactly what to do. I moved towards the doors, which were still standing open. Bruno, still grasping part of the sandwich in one paw, followed after me. When we get out into the corridor, we're going to run like mad. Stick close to the wall all the way and follow me. Don't forget that just about anyone who catches sight of you will probably try to kill you. I snatched the sandwich out of his paw and threw it away. Here goes. Now keep behind me. As soon as I was out of the ballroom, I took off like a flash. I streaked down the corridor, went through the lounge and the reading room and the library and the drawing room and came up to the stairs. Up the stairs I went, jumping quite easily from one to the other, keeping well in against the wall all the time. You with me, Bruno? Yeah, right here. My grandmother's room and my own were on the 5th floor. It was quite a climb, but we made it without meeting a single person on the way because everyone else was using the lift. On the 5th floor, I raced along a corridor to the door of my grandmother's room. A pair of her shoes was standing outside the door to be cleaned. Bruno was alongside me. Well, what do we do now? Suddenly, I caught sight of the chambermaid coming along the corridor towards us. I saw at once she was the same one who had reported me to the manager for keeping white mice. Not exactly, therefore, the sort of person I wanted to meet in my present condition. Quick, hide in one of those shoes. I hopped into one shoe and Bruno hopped into the other. I waited for the maid to walk past us, but she didn't. When she came to the shoes, she bent down and picked them up. In doing this, she put her hand right inside the one I was hiding in. When one of her fingers touched me, I may have bitten it. I know it was a silly thing to do, but I did it instinctively, without thinking. The maid let out a scream that must have been heard by ships far out in the English Channel, and she dropped the shoes and ran like the wind down the corridor. My grandmother's door opened up. What on earth is going on out here? I darted between her legs into her room, and Bruno followed me. Close the door, Grandmama. Please, hurry. She looked around and saw 2 small brown mice on the carpet. Please close it, I said, and this time she actually saw me talking and recognized my voice. She froze and became absolutely motionless. Every part of her body, her fingers and hands and arms and head, became suddenly as stiff as a marble statue. Her face turned even paler than marble, and her eyes were stretched so wide I could see the whites all around them. Then she started to tremble. Thought she was going to faint and fall over. Please close the door quickly, Grandmama. That awful maid might come back. She somehow managed to gather herself together enough to close the door. She leaned against it, though, staring down at me, white-faced and shaking all over. I saw tears beginning to come out of her eyes and go dribbling down her cheeks. Please don't cry, Grandmama. Things could be a lot worse. I did get away from them. I'm still alive, and so is Bruno. Very slowly, she bent down and picked me up with one hand. Then she picked Bruno up with the other and put us both on the table. There was a bowl of bananas in the center of the table, and Bruno jumped straight into it and began tearing away with his teeth at one of the banana skins to get at the fruit inside. My grandmother grasped the arm of her chair to steady herself, but her eyes never left me. Sit down, dear Grandmama. She collapsed into her chair. Oh, my darling, she murmured, and now the tears were really starting to stream down her cheeks. My poor sweet darling, what have they done to you? I know what they've done, Grandmama, and I know what I am. But the funny thing is, I don't honestly feel especially bad about it. I don't even feel angry. In fact, I feel rather good. I know I'm not a boy any longer, and I never will be again, but I'll be quite all right as long as there's always you to look after me. I wasn't just trying to console her. I was being absolutely honest about the way I felt. You may think it odd that I wasn't weeping myself, and I guess it was odd, but I simply can't explain it. I felt fine. Of course I'll look after you, my grandmother murmured, but who was the other one? That was a boy called Bruno Jenkins. They got him first. My grandmother took a new long black cigar out of a case in her handbag and put it in her mouth. She got out a box of matches and she struck it, but her fingers were shaking so much the flame kept missing the end of the cigar. When she got it lit at last, she took a long pull and sucked in the smoke. It seemed to calm her down a bit. Where did it happen? Where is the witch now? Is she in the hotel still? Grandmama, it wasn't just one. It was hundreds. They're all over the place. They're right here in the hotel this very moment. She leaned forward and stared at me. You don't actually mean. You don't mean to tell me they're holding the annual meeting right here in the hotel? They already held it, Grandmama. It's finished. I heard it all. And all of them, including the Grand High Witch herself, are downstairs now. They're pretending they're the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. They're all having tea with the manager. Oh, and they caught you? They smelled me out. Dog's droppings, was it? I'm afraid so, but it wasn't strong. They very nearly didn't smell me because I haven't had a bath for ages. Children should never have baths. It's a dangerous habit. I agree, Grandmama. She paused, puffing at her cigar. Do you really mean to tell me that they're now all downstairs having tea? I'm certain of it, Grandmama. There was another pause. I could see the old glint of excitement slowly coming back into my grandmother's eyes. And all of a sudden, she sat up very straight in her chair and said sharply, Tell me everything, right from the beginning, and please hurry. And that's going to be a great stopping place for us today. So our narrator turned into a mouse, got done in by a full bottle of Formula 86 delayed action mouse maker. Luckily, he and Bruno have retained their kind of mind and personality and ability to speak. And they made it back to his grandmother's room. And now, after kind of getting over the initial shock, she's saying, Tell me everything. So maybe she's got a bit of an idea. But you'll have to join us for the next part to hear what that might be. Bye.